What do you do when life knocks you flat on your back? And whether it's because of your bad luck or your bad choices, or both, you start to wonder if you'll ever get back on your feet again. In Houston, we've clearly seen how God can use a storm to wash away some of our vanity and our selfishness, and to remind us what really matters. But how does God work in other kinds of storms, like poverty, addiction, setbacks, and disappointments, to bring light into our darkness? We begin with Maybe God producer Julie Mueller-Courtois, who visited with some homeless survivors of Hurricane Harvey.
Can you tell me what Harvey was like for you?
Oh, yes. I was in the Lakewood area of Northside, Houston, Texas. I lost everything, like my clothes, my shoes, and people that were living, my neighbors, they lost all their stuff too.
Stayed in my van. Yeah.
And your van didn't get any damage?
Well, my transmission went out, but I made it through.
Me, I slept through it. I slept through it in my tent. I slept through the storm. I knew I'd be all right.
For many Houstonians, Hurricane Harvey will always be the biggest storm they've ever faced. A year later, people are still rebuilding their homes, and in some cases, survivors are still trying to shake the depression and the anxiety that followed the destruction. But for another group of Houstonians, Hurricane Harvey felt like just another storm of life, another day trying to survive the harsh conditions of their reality.
Poverty, drugs, prostitution, you name it, it's here. And when it gets dark here, you hear the gunshots. And I always tell the people, if you hear the shots, just wait a minute. If you don't hear an ambulance, that was just friendly fire. But if you hear the ambulance, someone got hit.
The Lord is awesome, isn't he? He'll never leave you nor forsake you, for he shall be with you what? Always.
Pastor Brown has been leading Church Under the Bridge for 14 years now, in a small, abandoned field in the 3rd Ward of Houston. With the help of churches all around the city, he feeds the homeless a hot meal every single night of the year and teaches them about God. And they listen closely, because no one understands what it's like to be them better than Pastor Brown. For years, he was addicted to drugs and living on the streets.
I knew I was no match for an enemy I couldn't see. So I began to seek the Lord, and it wasn't long after that I began to speak faith. And God provided from that point on the housing, clothing, you name it, God did it.
When Hurricane Harvey hit, Pastor Brown found himself homeless again. He and his wife lost everything except their car. They still haven't found a new home. But Pastor Brown wasn't about to let this storm knock him down, like the ones of his past. After the water receded, he drove around looking for the homeless from his church. He said he found some, like scared animals, under bridges. He brought them to shelters. And he tried to figure out how to get his church up and running again, despite food shortages and impassable roads.
And I remember by this tree, I waded in the water here, and I was telling the services council, because we have no way of getting food for you. And as I was making that statement, there was a caravan of high-terrain vehicles with these flags coming, and they turned to end here. They lined up there. They was blowing these horns. We're here for you. And I was like, I just looked up to heaven and stretched my hands, and I said, Lord, you are awesome.
Who were they?
I don't know. They said, we heard you guys be here, so we got plenty of food for you. And they did. And that went on for a couple of days, and it just brings tears to your eye that strangers that you don't even know would come out of nowhere. And that was a godsend.
Church Under the Bridge dropped from 120 people a night to about 30 in the weeks following the storm. So many attendees had been brought to shelters, like Willie, who arrived at George R. Brown in the back of a dump truck.
What was that like being at George R. Brown?
Oh, it was wild. It was something I'd never seen before. I actually felt like a refugee in my own city, because we had to be told what to do. We had to be told when to eat and shower, and I mean, it was like prison, but it was a little bit different because lives was being lost.
and Sunday, 9:30 until. Let's give the Lord a hand clap of praise for the service that we have in this community and abroad. Amen.
Like Pastor Brown, Willie struggled with addiction. He'd been in and out of prison for years. He was finally picking up the pieces of his life, living with his sister and leaning on Church Under the Bridge as his faith community when Harvey happened.
Nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I mean, people look at the things that they lost, but I mean, I gained more than I had before the storm. I mean, even that house that I had, that I was living in, I didn't lose that place because that place didn't belong to me. But now I have a new place, and a place that where I live. So, I mean, I think the storm did more good than it did bad, even though it was tragic. But it did more good because it brought a whole nation of people, a nationality of people together. We needed to be Houston strong. We needed that.
How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God.
There were a lot of positives to come out of the storm for the homeless community. I met a man who got off the streets and started college after the storm. Others finally found the housing they needed to get back on their feet.
Through this experience, more doors have opened, and the people are beginning to seek the help that they need. And that's what I always tell them, to get it while the assistance is there. And they are doing it. And I said, that's what it's about, because we keep pumping faith in them, pumping. And finally it gives, and that is the blessing unto me. Because I tell them that God is no respecter of person. What he's done for others, he'll do for you if you believe it.
It's the name above all names. He is worthy of all praise.
Twice a month, the Story Houston visits Church Under the Bridge. We make casseroles and serve dinner. We help lead a worship service. We pray for and with the homeless. We take communion together. But we're not just serving the homeless, they're also serving us. One of the volunteers I met at Church Under the Bridge said it best.
We're really busy in the suburbs, trying to chase life. It's fast-paced. We've overscheduled, and as a result, sometimes we miss what God is doing.
It's easy for us to race through our days and forget to stop and think about God and how he's working in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Until a storm like Harvey or cancer or addiction hits. But for some homeless people, they don't have the luxury of forgetting about God. They need to lean on him every single day. And when we serve them, we stop worrying about the little storms of our own lives and see God all around us.
If I have good, strong faith and belief in him that he exists and that he will do what he say he will do, that's where I get my strength from, my faith. I'm his son. He's our father, so I rely on him a lot. A lot. I rely on him a lot.
We intended for this to be part 2 of our Hurricane Harvey anniversary episode. We wanted to focus on people who found a way to stand tall again after that storm knocked them down. But as people shared their Harvey stories with us, they inevitably told us other stories about other times in their lives that they were flat on their backs, powerless, with no hope. A year ago, when all seemed lost, Houstonians turned our weary eyes to a handful of local heroes who gave us all hope. J.J. Watt, Mattress Mac, the mayor and the police chief, and of course, our own Houston Astros. I know baseball is just a game, but last fall, a worn-out, waterlogged city came together to support a franchise that just a few years prior was flat on its back, the laughingstock of professional sports. During the 2 long months that followed Harvey, the Astros title run symbolized everything good about the city they represent.
Reid, it's always good to see you. How are you?
Welcome to Houston.
This is great being back here. So you tell us what it's like. Again, the city's been through a lot with the hurricane, everything else. Back here, what is it like for the city to get a World Series?
It's exciting. You know, we landed coming in from L.A. There were people at the airport. There were people outside the stadium when we got here. And I knew this city would respond, and it's done it. And this is a great team to watch, and the fans, they love them.
We begin this act with Astros President Reid Ryan. Reid is responsible for all the Astros business operations, from stadium maintenance and scheduling games to community relations and, in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, disaster response. Reid landed his first job with the Astros over 30 years ago as a ball boy when his dad, Hall of Fame pitcher Nolan Ryan, played in Houston.
What's it like growing up, not just in a Major League Baseball family, but the son of Nolan Ryan?
You know, I mean, it was great for me. My mom and dad were great because, one, we lived in Alvin, which was a small town. We were very grounded. They both came from large families, and they realized that, you know, God gave us all our own individual gifts. And they never tried to say, hey, you need to live up to what my dad's done or what my mom's done. They just wanted me to be my own person and be the best person I could be. And so I got to live really what I tell everybody was every kid's dream, because I spent my summers at the Astrodome hitting, hanging out with Jose Cruz and his kids and people traveling on team flights. And during the off season, I was in Alvin playing Little League, knowing everybody in town.
Reid's life wasn't without adversity. When he was just 8 years old, he was literally knocked flat on his back, fighting for his life.
In 1979, I was in a terrible accident where I was run over by a car. This girl turned the corner and she smoked me, and I broke my left femur and my ribs, and I lost my kidney and my spleen. And yeah, it was a very serious deal, and ended up being quite a life-changing experience. It was kind of the first time I really spoke to God and just said, please don't let me die. And it sort of ended up changing my perspective, I guess I should say, on God and faith. And then I felt like, look, God had a plan for me, because I very easily could have died. Look, you know, to whom much is given, much is expected. I've been given a great opportunity at life. I've been given a great opportunity being the son of Nolan and Ruth Ryan. Been given a great opportunity being born in America, being a Texan. My glass is half full.
Glass half full. That's more than just a cute cliche Reid uses to inspire others. Throughout his life, he's tackled his toughest challenges with a glass half full frame of mind. A few weeks ago, I attended an event hosted by a Houston nonprofit called Work Faith Connection, and Reid was the keynote speaker. His address was called Building a Life on Shattered Dreams.
But my dad used to always say, Reid, don't let the failure of your last pitch ruin the success of your next one. There's people in the room that probably say, hey, yeah, easy for you to say, Reid Ryan, you're the president of the Astros, you grew up with a Hall of Fame dad. But I'm here to tell everybody in the room, and like I said, I don't share this story a lot, but I am the product of shattered dreams. I think everyone in this room is the product of shattered dreams. My goal was to be a Major League Baseball player. The struggle that I have, and I think each of us have, is putting what I want versus what God wants for my life. And it's hard because innately we're all selfish.
Reid's childhood dream didn't pan out. He lost a baseball scholarship at the University of Texas and transferred to TCU. That's where he met his wife, Nicole. They've been married over 20 years and have 3 kids. Then when Nicole was pregnant with her first child, life threw them another curveball.
When my son was born, which goes from the greatest day of your life to suddenly being one of the worst days of your life when he's not breathing and there's something wrong, and they rush him away to the NICU. And it turns out that my son had a stroke when he was being born, and suddenly it goes from this moment of, you know, you've always waited for, into hearing doctors say, hey, you know what, he might not ever walk, he might not ever talk. And so over the years, we've spent a ton of time and energy on therapies, and we had a hyperbaric chamber we bought. We've done cord blood transfusions. I mean, you name it, we've kind of tried everything under the sun. But at the minute he was born and we had those conversations, I think both Nicole and I's priorities changed. And we realized that, you know what, this plan we had of talking about all these things that this son would be, we realized God had a different plan than what we had, and that we had to trust that plan. And today, I'm proud to say my son is actually playing baseball at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. He's always wanted to play baseball. If you've never seen him, he throws and catches with the same hand like Jim Abbott. He was, as I said, born with cerebral palsy, so he has no motor skills in his right side. And I tell people all the time, Jackson is an average baseball player, but he is an incredible athlete because he has worked his tail off to achieve success that he's wanted. Thank you.
Meeting Reid for the first time in his office, overlooking the field at Minute Maid Park, it was clear to me that the struggles in his past have shaped the way that he does his job today. When Harvey hit Houston, Reid sent his family out of town but stayed back to take care of his house and the stadium, his staff, and the team.
Who were the players that were most directly affected by Harvey?
I'd say for us, our Latin players struggled because they had never been through a hurricane, and then you're in a country that's not your own, in a city that's not your own, you know, trying to handle language barrier and all the different things. Throw on top of that our own employees who service these players and their families were dealing with it. It ended up making for some crazy times.
25 full-time Astros employees lost their homes to Harvey. Minute Maid Park sustained significant damage as well. The Astros were forced to play a few home games in Tampa Bay, and after that, with the city still in shock, it was up to Reid to decide when it would be safe and appropriate for Houston to host baseball games again.
We visited with the mayor, and he was wanting, people to get back to normal because at a certain point, how long are you going to sit around? The rain's gone. The city's dry. People have been devastated, but not everybody. But even those that were devastated, they want a distraction. They want something to get their mind off what they've been doing for the last week, which was sitting in water, mucking their house out and, fighting for their lives. And so we looked at it as an opportunity to say, look, we only want to do what's the right thing. We don't want to be here playing baseball and minimizing the severity of this storm. But at the same time, at the mayor's urging, he's like, no, play. People need a distraction.
Baseball is back in the city of Houston 1 week after Hurricane Harvey lashed out at this wonderful trying to finish off game one, and a ground ball to the right side. Marwin from shallow right makes the play. The Astros win 12-8.
On Saturday, September the 2nd, the Astros played their first post-Harvey game in Houston. Over 30,000 Houstonians took a break from mucking houses to watch their hometown team. That day, the Astros scored 12 runs. It looked like their hitters were taking the whole city's frustration out on the New York Mets starting pitcher, whose name, by the way, was Matt Harvey.
AJ made a very impassioned speech to the crowd before the game.
I remember that.
Which I think set the tone for everything we did from that moment on.
Hello, Houston. It's good to be home. On behalf of the players, the coaches, our organization, we want to thank everyone in the city of Houston that's doing something good for somebody else. Now, we wear this patch on our jersey the rest of the year to represent you. So stay strong, be strong. We appreciate every one of you. Go Astros.
Ninth inning now of Game 7. Houston leading 4-0. This crowd has been unreal. Standing the entire game, basically. Bird into center. Springer says he's got it. The Houston Astros win the pennant. Unconventional, yes, but that's what the Astros have been. AJ Hinch has done a great job. And the Astros were built for 2017. They've been given a chance by going to the World Series.
Go to TransStar for a news conference featuring the mayor and the Harris County Judge. They're going to give an update on the circumstances and the preparations for both the county and the city. You see Harris County Judge Ed Emmett there.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We are going to have, as we've been saying all along, a major rain event over the next several days, and we've dealt with those in the past.
Another hometown hero to emerge during Hurricane Harvey was Judge Ed Emmett. He became Houston's face of hope during the storm as he worked alongside the mayor and chief of police to keep as many Houstonians as possible safe and informed.
I never thought I'd say this, but I've now discovered hurricanes are easy because, see, Harvey wasn't a hurricane. It was a rainstorm. Hurricanes, you just calculate when they're going to hit, what the storm surge is going to be, who you need to evacuate, tell everybody else to stay in place. It goes away fairly quickly. Harvey, though, we didn't know which areas were going to be impacted. We didn't realize we were going to be cut off from the rest of the state so that supplies couldn't get in.
No one is more Houston than Ed Emmett. He was born here in 1949, and he basically never left. After high school, he attended Rice University, Houston's version of an Ivy League school. He and his wife, Gwendolyn, have been married for 43 years and have 4 children. Ed has spent nearly all of his adult life in public service, and since 2007 he served as Harris County Judge, which, according to a state statute, also makes him the Director of Emergency Management for a county that has a larger population than 24 states. How many people do you serve? How many people live in Harris County?
4.7 million people live in Harris County, and 160,000 homes flooded.
How many lives were lost?
I think the official count ended up 36 or 37. And, of course, a lot of those were lost because they were out in the vehicles. And that's why when people start talking about evacuations, no, you don't evacuate in a circumstance like this.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're most at risk.
What do you remember most seeing from people in Harris County in response to the storm that maybe surprised you, maybe didn't surprise you since you've lived here all your life?
What didn't surprise me was the willingness of people to come out and help in their boats. As you know, at noon, I asked for volunteers to come forward with boats and high water vehicles. The response, I don't have an exact number, but it's been gratifying to say the least. You just can't thank people enough for going out for their neighbors. And so I want to thank all the people who are out there helping get our residents out of harm's way. When I stood up and said, if you have a boat, come help, people applauded that decision and said, oh, that was brilliant. No, it wasn't brilliant. I mean, people were going to do that whether I asked them to or not. But it allowed us to organize it a little bit better.
I remember you posted a picture on Twitter. It made such an impact of a line around the NRG stadium. And you said,
it's volunteers.
This isn't people who need shelter. These are
yeah,
workers.
We had to turn away volunteers because we got to a ratio of a volunteer for every person in the shelter.
Wow. That's a beautiful thing. Some of those people waiting in line to help their fellow Houstonians, and some of those who were taking their boats out to rescue strangers, they'd been knocked down by the storm too. Their families were also displaced. Their homes were also flooded. Their futures were uncertain, but that didn't stop them from helping. They weren't paralyzed by the storm. They were strengthened by it. Judge Ed is no different. Not many people know this about the judge, but just a few weeks before Harvey hit, a storm in his personal life knocked him down pretty hard. Everybody's talking about you and the mayor and how heroic and selfless y'all were.
See, I wouldn't. I'm going to interrupt. I wouldn't consider us heroic. We did our jobs, and we did our jobs well. The heroes were the people who were out there waist high, shoulder high in water, saving people's lives. Those are the heroes. They didn't have to be doing that.
Well, I appreciate your humility, and as much as you want me to take you off the hero list, I refuse. You're on my hero list,
well,
Judge.
Thank you.
For many reasons, among those, the fact that if anybody had a reason to call in sick that week, it would have been you. Tell us what happened in the week or 10 days prior to the storm in your personal life.
The short answer is I had a minor stroke on August the 15th. I was driving to Victoria and talking on the phone, and suddenly I was seeing double, but not just double. I was seeing double at weird angles. And I'd played tennis that morning for 2 hours outdoors and thought, okay, some kind of heat-related thing. So then I called the doctor, and the doctor's office said, well, whatever you do, don't drive. Well, I was
halfway to Victoria.
Yeah, I'm out there at a roadside park. So I made it all the way into Victoria, and I felt fine. As soon as I got there, the people at the Port of Victoria who I was meeting with, it wasn't 5 minutes, and they had me headed to the emergency room. And I got there, and it turns out that there are 2 kinds of strokes. There's hemorrhagic and ischemic. And if you have an ischemic stroke, there's this medicine called TPA that if you get it in a 4-hour window, it clears it up. But you have to be sure you're having it. So they did the CAT scan and realized that I was having an ischemic event, and so they gave me the TPA and helicoptered me back to Houston.
Wow.
And 24 hours later, I was fine, but that was a real eye-opener.
Yeah. And so I would imagine your doctor probably gave you a directive to take it easy?
Yeah. He said at least a month, just,
Yeah. So did you give any of that a second thought as the rain started to fall and it looked like?
No, because the other thing is, it's stressful, and I probably should have gotten more sleep than I did, but yeah, we have a doctor on staff out there, and they were checking my blood pressure and everything on a regular basis.
How many days straight did you work?
6.
6 days without going home or anything?
Right. 6 days, 6 nights. Got 11 hours of sleep total.
Wow. At what point in that whole process during the storm and in the aftermath does the switch go off in your mind and you go from being Harris County judge to being citizen, father, neighbor?
Oh, that's an easy answer. There was a church that was getting ready to send, I think it was 1,000 pair of new shoes to Africa. And somehow they made contact with my youngest daughter, Patricia, and said, we got people here that need them. So she set up folding tables on her front lawn in the Braes Heights section, which had just been devastated. And when I turned on her street, I pulled over to the side because all I saw were piles of debris on both sides, 8-10 feet high in this, upper middle class neighborhood, but it was true all over town in all kinds of neighborhoods. But then I saw people walking out of their houses, a couple of couples, to these piles, and they weren't taking things to them. They were going out and looking through them. It was at that point that I realized those aren't piles of debris. Those are people's lives. And they're on the curb. So, that just changed everything. It became, okay, this is now the rest of my public life, making sure this doesn't happen again.
When I think about Judge Emmett and Reid Ryan and all the things that could have held them back, but instead they lived to serve others and to spread hope, it reminds me of a verse from a book called Romans in the New Testament. We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. Just 5 weeks after Harvey, and just a few years removed from being the worst team in baseball, the Houston Astros beat the Los Angeles Dodgers to claim their first ever World Series crown. It's hard to describe what that team meant to this town. Their leadoff hitter is a baby-faced, mixed-race all-star who speaks with a stutter. Their Puerto Rican shortstop hadn't heard from some of his family since Hurricane Maria devastated his hometown. And their MVP is a 5'6" Venezuelan who was told time and again that he's too small to be a big leaguer. This team, like the town they represent, had 1,000 reasons to give in, but they overcame every obstacle in front of them. And in the process, they inspired us all.
Sanchez success. Here's a ground ball right side, could do it. The Houston Astros are world champions for the first time in franchise history.
The Houston Astros were a mirror of who the people of the city of Houston are to their core. And they exemplified that in the way they played the game. And it was only fitting that we won it all because it brought immense joy to this city in a time that it needed it probably more than ever. At the end of the day, this was a great tragedy. Lives were lost, property was damaged, but I believe that we came out of this, I choose to believe that we came out of this better people and a better community than we were before that.
I'm extremely grateful to be here in front of every one of you this morning, as scary as it is. My name is Katie. For those of you that don't know me, I am 16 and I am a junior in high school.
In 2016, a high schooler in my congregation took the stage on a Sunday morning to share her testimony with a room full of people. Some she'd known her whole life, and some complete strangers. From the outside, Katie was a talented young woman, raised in a loving family with deep Christian roots.
I was born into this church, baptized in this church. My parents go to this church. My grandfather was a minister at this church. My grandmother was the wedding coordinator at St. Luke's. So St. Luke's is a really big part of my family, always has been, and hopefully it always will be.
3 years ago, St. Luke's United Methodist planted the Story Houston, the community that I help lead today. Their pristine campus sits in River Oaks, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in Houston. And as you might imagine, it's not the kind of place people usually go to air their dirty laundry for all to see. But at the Story, we've always encouraged people to be vulnerable with each other, even in our Sunday best. We've seen how powerful it can be when we share our stories, even the painful or ugly stories, as a way of helping other people who are facing similar struggles. But Katie had a lot to lose by opening up the way that she did that morning.
When I was in 8th grade, I started smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol. It was mainly just because I wanted to fit in with my peers. I didn't feel very accepted in middle school, so I was hanging out with girls that were in high school and boys that were in high school, and in a way I felt like that was where I belonged.
I wanted to catch up with Katie to hear more about what happened back in high school and to get an update on her life today. So what was it that was going on during that time that sort of precipitated that downturn?
I had some depression, but because of just feeling like I needed to hold everything together, that, you know, I needed to be good for other people, be good for my family, for, you know, my younger brother who, you know, has his own like learning disabilities, and he needed a lot of the attention, and I didn't want to put that attention on myself. I wanted to be happy Katie, because from the outside, like a lot of other people seem to be very happy, and we get a lot of messages in society that we gotta keep a perfect image of everything is okay, I have everything together.
Over my freshman year, it was progressing. I started smoking more than on the weekends, and by January throughout May, I was using cocaine and Molly, ecstasy. I was using Xanax almost daily and drinking a lot, and basically just taking any drug that was offered to me, because it didn't really matter as long as it changed the way I felt. I didn't want to feel this anxiety that I felt inside me, and I wanted to have friends. I was lying. I was manipulating my parents. I was hurting the relationships that I had at church.
I had these two separate lives where I tried to keep things just kind of steady for like my church life and my school life, and then I had this completely separate like party girl image, and kind of like the devil and the angel on your shoulder kind of thing.
Did those worlds ever collide?
Oh my goodness, yes. I couldn't fathom the idea of going a weekend without, you know, either getting high or drunk. And so I went on a church retreat, which you were the speaker at, and brought alcohol into the parsonage. And not only did I drink, I got every single other girl in the house to drink. And that was definitely the perfect storm. I mean, you know, someone ended up in the hospital that night, and things were just never the same.
How did everything change after that with like your friends around church or even at school?
Oh man. Of course, part of it was parents, I'm sure, but none of them were allowed to talk to me anymore or hang out with me. And it wasn't fun being this like problem child that other parents told their kids not to hang out with, you know? Right. I was pretty numb at this point. I didn't want to allow myself to feel like, oh, I should probably change something. I should probably make this right. My way of coping with it was, all right, well, this really isn't a big deal. I can just, you know, I'll hang out with these people instead. These people don't know about what happened. And I tried to make everything feel like it was okay.
Right.
And that was probably the issue. You know, I was just stuffing everything inside and not letting myself feel remorse.
My parents did everything they could to put a stop to all this behavior. You know, they tried not giving me any money so that I couldn't buy any drugs. And as a result of that, I went to even more extreme measures in order to get drugs. I was exchanging my body with men in order to get drugs.
I'll never forget like the moment in the room at church where there's, you know, hundreds of people who just are dressed in their Sunday clothes and looking all perfect and proper, and how you could hear a pin drop the moment you shared a little bit about what happened, that you had, you know, traded your body for drugs and things like that. It was like the whole world just froze when you said it. How did you feel up there at that moment telling that story at 16 years old?
That's something I even still think about when people say, oh, I saw your video. That's like the one thing that I really just keep thinking about is, okay, now they know this really dark part of me that happened. And sometimes I'm like, should I have shared that? Was that too much? And I think I had a lot of fear in, you know, sharing that. I mean, and it wasn't just that. It was also like, you know, I was telling these like crazy lies, and I was trading people my ADD medication for narcotics. And so there was just a lot of things I was doing that gave me a lot of reason to feel shame and guilt. And
yeah, you've mentioned that, and that you felt like you were totally unworthy of love. And I think to the young woman that I know now, so confident, full of life, and just full of God's love, and to think of you just feeling completely unworthy of the love of God, I think just speaks to the power of addiction. Like, where do these feelings come from that you're unworthy of love?
So I obviously have always had such a great love for God. And I would read, you know, in the Bible that Jesus loves you no matter what, and he's going to forgive you for all of these things. And I would just think, how? I'm terrible. I think a lot of people feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny, like when you are in that frame of mind, and then every time you make the same mistake again, you feel more and more unworthy, because you know you were loved and you know God did love you, but you did those things anyway.
Yeah, I think I was just so numb at that point. I was, you know, not even trying to think about that. And it wasn't until I got sober and was in treatment that I was like, oh my gosh, I did these things. Where do I go from here?
In May of 2015, my parents woke me up in the middle of the night, and they told me that I was going to be getting on a plane and going to Utah. And later that day, I was in the middle of the West Desert of Utah in a wilderness program. I was there for 4 months, and then I went to residential for 7 months. Throughout all that time, those 11 months, I went through different stages of being in denial, being upset, being angry, being shameful.
At what point do you feel like you actually arrived at rock bottom?
I just remember the moment of getting all these letters from my family saying, this is how you made us feel, and having my therapist, you know, telling me over and over again, like, you're full of BS. Like, you keep saying all these things, but your actions aren't matching your words. And I remember I had to write just like a complete accountability letter of everything that I had done. And I think kind of looking at it all together, I was like, okay, yeah, this was pretty bad. And I remember just like crying and praying on my knees and saying, I want to be better. Help me, God.
One night in the wilderness, I got down on my knees and I prayed. I prayed out loud. I was crying. It was emotional. And over time, praying became less about, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do in order to be a Christian. It became more about, this is what I need to do in order to survive. And after those 11 months, I went home and I'm coming up on 18 months sober, and even though I still struggle all the time, I still make mistakes, I'm not the person who I was before. God saved me.
We're talking about the storms of life, and whether it's a storm like Harvey that puts a city on its back, or whether it's a storm like you faced as a teenager, and just how these storms knock us down and how people somehow find the way to get back on their feet again. How did it all turn around? What was the key?
God. I mean, sometimes I think like there's literally no other explanation. Like, you know, I was going through the ringer, and nobody can change someone else. And, you know, they say like, oh, it was up to you. But sometimes I feel like I didn't really do that much. I feel like I kind of just had to pray and let it happen and let God do the work. And I think, of course, like there were people that were helping me along the way, my parents for sure, and everybody at church too. But God was working through all of those people to help me. God was working through my therapist. God was working through me.
I started to realize that I was forgiven and that I was accepted at this church, that I was loved at this church, that I had a church to come home to and to be a part of. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I could not be where I am today without the Story Houston, without the love that I have received from every one of you.
After she shared her testimony, my team and I decided not to post it on social media or anywhere public. But Katie and her family insisted. Within a week, thousands of people had watched it, and complete strangers reached out to Katie to thank her for her courage and to show their support. Why did you want the world to see it?
I think I was ready to let go of all of the embarrassment. And in 12-step programs, they have these things called the promises. And one of the promises is we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I think at that time in my life, I was really trying to live out all of the promises. And I saw that as a way of me embracing the promises.
So we're talking on Skype now because you're thousands of miles away in California. But could you just tell our listeners where you are right now, Katie?
Yeah, I'm in Claremont, California, and I'm studying at the Claremont colleges. And probably some of the most challenging work I have ever done. Super overwhelming, but I'm just so happy here.
The past has a way of always haunting us, you know, and coming back for us. And I'm sure you're not like free and clear from all the struggles of your past either.
Oh, for sure. I mean, of course, I'd like to like completely leave the past behind. But, you know, my parents were very hurt by everything that I had done, and they have reason to worry sometimes. And so as I was moving into college and not going to be with them all the time, you know, they said, it would make us feel a lot more comfortable if you would complete some random drug screens for us. And I originally took that so hard. I was like, man, they haven't drug tested me in the last 3 years. And now they want this. Have I done something wrong? And the way they put it was they knew that college was going to be a tricky spot. And it is, you know.
Sure.
And I'm on a wet campus for one thing. And so it's everywhere.
So how do you avoid that scene?
There are people that don't do drugs. And specifically, I hang out with a lot of athletes because they aren't doing drugs. And that's kind of one of the best things about college is that there's so many people and not everybody is the same. And there's a place for everyone. And I feel like I found my place.
So as you think about the thousands of people listening to this story on this podcast now, what would you say to that person who's just hopeless about the future?
I want people to know that there's hope and that things are going to be okay. I think that's one of the issues that happens every day is people feel like they aren't going to be okay. And they forget to think, okay, wait, God has a plan. I'm going to be fine. everything's going to happen the way it's supposed to. And, you know, I even sometimes feel like just overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, everything feels like it's falling to pieces and, you know, nothing's working out the way I want it to. And I have to pray to trust in God's plan. And it's not overnight, definitely not. But,
right, it's definitely
you know,
a journey.
Time heals for sure.
One final note before we say goodbye. If you'd like to make a small contribution to help the ongoing recovery efforts in Houston, go to Amazon and search for a children's book called H is for Harvey. A member of my church, Julie Beasley, wrote this story about acts of everyday kindness during and after the storm. 100% of the royalties are donated to the Astros Foundation, the official team charity of the Houston Astros. And of course, I want to say to those who are facing a storm in life right now, no matter how big and mighty that storm may feel, no matter how small and powerless you may feel in its shadow, there is hope. Don't give up. You can put your life back together again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Maybe God.
Maybe God is produced by Eric Huffman, Brandon Duke, and me, Julie Merle-Courtois. Our sound engineers are Pat Lowry and Aubrey Snyder. Our editor is Brittany Holland, music is by Nathan Bonus, and our intern is Caroline Love. If you have questions or doubts you'd like us to address in upcoming episodes of Maybe God, email us at maybegodpod@gmail.com or start a discussion with us on our Facebook page, Maybe God Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe now on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app.